working in consulting in Russia. And now he has his Substack where he provides very insightful commentary on the Ukraine-Russia crisis that's ongoing at the moment. So good evening, Gilbert. Thank you for joining us tonight. How are you?
My pleasure.
Great, thank you. So you've been very active. I've been seeing you a lot of videos. You've been giving your opinions, and I thought, wow, it's really a perfect moment. But it makes it a very different topic discussing this with you because unlike many other commentators, you've actually lived in Russia. You spent decades in Russia as a businessman, and you have a lot of practical experience that is, lacking from a lot of other experts. Um, how does that experience make your analysis different from all these other commentators, for example?
Well, I'm glad you used the neutral word different rather than better or worse or what. The point is that we have different perspectives coming out of that is I and other commentators whom the audience may be familiar with. We have different perspectives, as we well
Right.
should, because we have different personal experience, different for education, different specialities that we're in, and so it would be illogical if we all said the same thing or saw the same
Right.
thing. And
Absolutely.
it is up to the audience to profit or benefit from these differences and to, if we can set people thinking and they reach their own conclusions on what they hear makes the most sense to them. If I have to go back just to your introductory remarks, yes, I worked um, for many years, serving as a consultant in the late 1970s. Then I worked as an employee, as an expat manager. Very interesting time working from 1988 to 1993 for United Parcel Service. Those people with the brown cars that circulate all around Europe and the world delivering
Wow.
packages. And I was their lead man in developing their presence across all of Eastern Europe, from the East European states that are now members of the EU to all the way out to Vladivostok. That was a
Wow.
very exciting time. That
Wow.
was as a manager traveling in from outside, because
Wow.
that was still the Soviet Union, and foreign companies did not have presence establishments in the Soviet Union. But from from about 1994, when I went in, if you were in the Russia business, then you were planted in Russia. You were not serving it from Cologne or London or New York. And so I moved to Russia in 1994, and based in Moscow, but also some of the time based in St. Petersburg, and was working as an expat manager, the general manager, in fact, for several large companies in succession. As an expert and an outside hire, I had a very short shelf life with these companies. I was the person, I was the person who set them up so that their own internal fair-haired boy could take over an establishment that I helped to create. I say that with no sense of animosity or regret. It's simply a statement of how these things are done.
Yeah.
Many companies would bring in people with language knowledge and expertise, set things up, recruit a lot of local people who would be bilingual, and then they would bring in their own management from the States or from Europe, depending on what I was serving, whether they were American companies or European companies, who would take over and become general managers after I was given a golden handshake. So I had a succession of golden handshakes and saw a variety of companies and industries as they were setting up shop in Russia, which was very difficult to do, took a lot of money, and was usually done, but was interesting for me because it was done at the board level. So I would be traveling back and forth once a month at least while based in Moscow. I would be once a month, I would be in London meeting with the European management. to discuss our next steps. So that was an
Mhm.
exciting time. But that was not the end of my time in Russia, not at all. In this millennium, I have gone back very, very frequently until the COVID put an end to travel to within Russia and to Russia, I mean within Europe and to Russia. I was going 5, 6 times a year, spending 2 weeks or more with my wife, who was Russian, and we had maintained an apartment in St. Petersburg. So it was not for, it was a, for 5, 6 years was the time where I worked, my primary income from these major corporations. And then I stayed on for a while until 2008 when I officially moved residence back to Belgium and
Okay.
then continued to visit. That's the background.
Mm. And so you had a great time in Russia, I think, from the sound of it. Did you, how the Russian people misconstrued? Because you see a lot, especially on Twitter. It's really terrible. They say some of the worst things about the Russians. They're subhuman. They have terrible infrastructure. Yada yada yada. I mean, the list goes on. Especially, when they happen to get a strike in on Russia, they celebrate a lot, and they call Russia all these different things, which are, I think, incorrect. What's your opinion on that?
Look, Russia is 145 million people. That's probably more like 155 million people now, with inclusion of these conquered parts of Ukraine. Uh, they are very diverse. Uh, the ethnic Russians are the single largest component of the Russian Federation, but there are maybe 100 or more ethnic groups that you could call verging on nationalities that are part of the Russian Federation. So to get your arms around it and give a generalization or an easy answer to your question would be inappropriate. But I
Absolutely.
will say that when you're speaking about Moscow, it's one of the world's leading cities in
Right.
every sense. That's a total different situation from what it was in the 1990s when I was setting up representative offices and production for some major corporations. Then it was what it had inherited from the Soviet Union, which was a city that was not very pleasant to live in. That was it took a lot of money and a lot of protection. You said it was a great place to be, not particularly in the 1990s, not particularly in the industry. I was, for much of the 6 years when I was a general manager, I was serving companies in the liquor industry. Liquor industry in Russia, like the liquor industry in many countries, was always highly criminalized.
Yeah.
And so I had a driver who was also a bodyguard, and and it was necessary.
Yeah.
There were some pretty tough folks that we negotiated with, and
Mm.
the corporate executives who came in to try to collect money from them. I know we're kind of tiptoeing, shall we say? Okay,
Okay.
so, so I've seen a lot of Russia, but it is, and I will generalize it one way.
Yeah.
You have to love Russia to like Russia because it is not an easy place for an outsider to fit into, and
Correct.
there are a lot of sharp corners. But
Mm.
it is a major country, a major power, and a cultural center. And much of the time that I was there, I appreciate even the worst days of the economic
Mhm.
collapse in the 1990s. High culture maintained itself and was a wonderful um, uh, relief from the difficulties of daily life when the Russian economy was suffering so in the 90s.
Wow. That's an amazing insight. So going a bit deeper into the Ukraine crisis, right? So current events. You recently wrote in your Substack about a potential split between Putin and Lavrov regarding how to handle the negotiations. Could you explain that dynamic? Is Putin too optimistic about a deal with the West, or is he is he gonna get it through somehow?
Um, I think we have to personalize this. Putin's position has been that the presidency of Donald Trump gives Russia a unique opportunity to restore relations with the United States and through the United States with the collective West. It's not that the United States as an abstraction, it is Mr. Trump the man. They have had some rapport, it's true. And Putin felt that unlike his predecessors, particularly about the Biden administration, in which they broke off all contact and were trying to isolate Russia and turn it into a pariah, Mr. Trump was open to establishing relations. But I have to put this, for having just personalized it, I will depersonalize it. Not because Mr. Trump is a humanitarian, that he wants to stop the killing. That is, some little old ladies may like that story, but or some kids. But those of in between age, like myself, they and certainly, but your generation, we should appreciate that Mr. Trump is not a sentimentalist. He is a realpolitik man. Realpolitik is not something the general public likes to hear about or think about. We like to think about values and things like that. But he is cultivating relations with Russia because he wants to separate Russia from China by obtuse and rather stupid policies of 3 successive American administrations, which tried to surround Russia, to intimidate Russia. They forced Russia into Chinese arms so that they became much closer. Not quite formal alliance, but de facto alliance. Just as in the time of Richard Nixon, relations with China were very close, but they never had a written alliance as such. So it is, that's the way China behaves. De facto, they are allies. And de facto, if there were to be a blow-up in the world, the United States would find itself in military confrontation with 2 superpowers and would be defeated, China and Russia. And they understand that in Washington. Certainly, they understand that in Mr. Trump's office. Therefore, he wanted to break that very close relationship by restoring some semblance of normality in relations between the United States and Russia.
And that seems very important because to me, after 4 years of, I don't know, 32,000 sanctions, and there's some effect, yeah, there's no question about it. There's a little bit of an effect going on. A lot of oil trade has shifted. We don't buy anything from Russian crude directly anymore or gas. But I was looking last year in 2024, India was still the largest supplier of petroleum to the European Union. So it feels like either way, you're still going to have Russian energy coming into Europe and into different parts of the world just through different areas. And my point would be to, bring them back to the table. Do you think they could really bring them back? Because there's a lot of talk about the 28-point peace plan. Now it's down to 19 points or 22 points. The reports are differing on this. Do you think Zelensky and Ukraine are ready to make the key concessions, territorial, say no to NATO, and recognize lost territories as Russian, de facto Russian land, let's say?
Who was speaking for Ukraine? Who is has presidential powers in Ukraine? Will keep on changing until someone takes that office who is ready to accept everything and capitulate. There's no question but that the points in the 28-point plan will be realized. That is the core points. There are a lot of additional throw-in points which will be realized, but not as part of the peace that's signed between Russia and Ukraine, because they're not really Ukraine issues. They are Russian, European, and Russian United States issues. But just to take a step back, I didn't answer your question about Putin and Lavrov. There is the issue of they didn't agree on whether the policies that were signed off on in Alaska still held. Mr. Putin felt they were, and that not to pay too much attention to what the Americans were saying now. After I have an understanding with Trump, and we will realize what was discussed in the summit in Alaska. Mr. Lavrov, and particularly his deputy, Mr. Ryabkov, said the game is up. The Americans have stepped back and are not going to honor what they told you in Alaska, and the role for diplomacy is over. Well, that was the first spat. Then it moved on, and the bigger issue in the last week was that Mr. Putin has completely sidelined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and their boss, Mr. Lavrov, from the peace process. This is a violation of all normal administrative policies, and that is a big issue because he has entrusted the negotiations to neophytes, to people who are out who they are smart people. They know America very well. Mr. Dmitriev, Kirill Dmitriev, who was speaking to Vitkov and who together put together this 28-point plan. He's a very smart man, but he's not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And for Putin to have sidelined them is pretty tough stuff.
Oh, indeed. So do you really think that Zelensky will be forced? Because now the latest rumors say that they have been sent, Trump said something about, okay, you've been pushed into a particular decision. Now the Russians have to be convinced about it. Do we think it was hit home that there's no more NATO and territorial concessions have to be made? Or are they going to continue to play the game of shenanigans? Like, okay, we're not going to recognize any of these territorial concessions. Do you think we're getting close?
A week ago, the head of negotiations was Mr. Yermak. Yesterday, the head of negotiations was Umir. They will keep on changing the head of negotiations until the head agrees to the Russian terms.
That's a nice way to put it. Okay. So as a resident of Brussels, right? We live in Belgium. I live in Belgium. You recently mentioned Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever opposing the confiscation of Russian assets. Do you see a growing fracture in Europe between national leaders and the European Commission towards Russia on this topic? Or will they get it through somehow? Because, we still have 27, 28 other countries who could, play spoiler.
Mr. Putin is very careful about his words, and he doesn't like to say anything that might insult his peers. But he said something quite insulting about the European leaders. I believe it was in his Q&A in Bishkek, that they are not very competent. I was putting it kindly.
It's true.
The reality is that these are weak persons, almost all of them, and they are finding strength in unity. That's why they view it, and so they locked arms. And 24 out of 27 are complete conformists on policy of dealing with Russia.
Incredible.
3 of them, that is, Mr. Orban was the first, Mr. Robert Fico of Slovakia is the second, and the newly elected president of Czechia is the third, who have shown that they do not support Ursula von der Leyen's policy of continuing the war forever. Mr. Bart De Wever is not a geopolitical actor. He is really a man deeply involved in defending Flemish rights and Flemish interests within the monarchy of Belgium. And he is in favor of confederation, which further devolution of all powers to the region, that his own region. Those are his primary interests of his professional and political career. So it was quite extraordinary to see him stepping out, breaking ranks with the 26 others
It's quite impressive.
conformers.
I'm rarely impressed, but yes, it was lovely to see him hit back a bit. Yeah.
And he did it first. He did it at the last European Council meeting. That's a meeting of the heads of state and heads of government
Right.
that convenes about roughly once a month, and is a kind of a second executive body of the European institutions in parallel with the European Commission. And it sets general policies. And he came out and vetoed the recommendations of the other 28 members, or following Ursula von der Leyen's and Kaja Kallas's demand that they proceed to essentially confiscate the Russian state assets held in Euroclear, which is a legal entity in Belgium, and it holds these Russian, probably mostly papers, but mostly probably government obligations from the European member states, and they're sitting there. And so they all recommended that these be used as collateral, 185 billion euros, be used as collateral to extend 145 billion euro loan to Ukraine. Now that is a very clever stratagem because it doesn't directly attack the assets. The assets could be attacked only if and when they're called. That is, that after the loans have been given out, and for some reason the Ukraine is unable to pay it because loans would be to Ukraine.
Right.
Now, so it's all very clever, but it's a very transparent confiscation. Mm-hmm. It is understood from the first day that the Ukrainians would pay only with money that they receive in reparations from the Russians for having agreed, accepted that they are guilty for the war damages and guilty for the war. Now that you can exclude right away. The Russians, as the victors, will never ever pay one penny. So, as I say, the actuality is it's a confiscation. Mr. De Wever, a little bit more than a month ago, vetoed that because he said it would expose Belgium to legal procedures that the Russians would undertake and probably would win. And if they won, if the money were expended and had to be paid back by Belgium, that would amount to 1/3 of the annual GDP of Belgium. In short, the country would be ruined.
Yeah,
well, that was his argument a month ago. And von der Leyen has been busy since trying to round up the European member states to agree that they would share the risk with Belgium, so it would not be so horrendous. However, Mr. De Wever in the past week issued a 4-page letter to von der Leyen saying, "Hey, wait, there's another reason. If we do this, it will wreck the peace negotiations." So Mr. De Wever did what 27 other member states know, but didn't dare to say that von der Leyen is a warmonger and wants to defeat the peace efforts. He said
absolutely,
and that is the bravest thing I can imagine. I would put in my 10 euros for a monument to De Wever.
Well, if I'm being honest, I voted for him, and I'm very glad that at least for that point, my vote counted. I was really happy about that. Well, so that's really interesting, and we're coming down to there's been some attacks in the Black Sea against the Russian Shadow Fleet. You mentioned that there was some British involvement in the Black Sea, and they might be hurting U.S. interests. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. From the beginning, the Brits were clearly behind the use of naval drones on behalf of Ukraine. because how much Ukrainian fingers were ever touching these things is not clear.
No.
There have been attacks on the Crimean Bridge with using naval drones. They were clearly identified as having been operated by the Brits. Now, what has happened in the last 2 weeks? There are two kinds of attacks. One, as you say, on the Shadow Fleet, which was within 30 kilometers of the Turkish coast. So it was
Correct.
within the Turkish economic zone.
Yeah.
And these were attacked by drones. The question is, who actually launched those? The Ukrainians claim that they were the ones, but this is a rather sophisticated operation. And on one
Yeah.
hand, you have to ask, to what extent was MI6 or other British military involved in this attack? But that is not the attack that has to do with American interests. That's a separate issue. Also, in the last week, there was a third attempt to interrupt the flow of oil coming to Novosibirsk, so major
Right.
Russian port on the Black Sea, at which point tankers for the world oil market pick up oil that is coming from wells in Kazakhstan. There is a major pipeline that passes from Kazakhstan, from these wells, to Novorossiysk, where the export is made. Now, this is a serious amount of oil. It is, well, it sounds like not much, 1% of global oil, but still that's a lot. It is
That's a lot.
80% of the oil exports of Kazakhstan are passing via the port
Notice.
installation in Novorossiysk. Now, who owns that oil? Americans. The
Oh,
oil is drilled by an American firm in Kazakhstan. This goes back more than 20 years.
wow.
Uh, and so essentially, it was American financial interests that have been attacked by the supposedly Ukrainian drones that hit Novorossiysk. I maintain it is entirely reasonable to assume that British intelligence, if not British military, hands-on, were involved in these attacks.
Mm.
The objective, of course, is to spread the regional damage and to bring in as many outsiders into the Ukraine-Russia war as possible. This has been
Mm.
a constant objective of the Ukrainians for 3.5 years. They
We've
wanted
seen
to,
that. Yeah.
yeah, they wanted to bring in NATO, they want to bring in Turkey, they want to bring in everybody
Mm.
because they themselves, by themselves, cannot withstand Russia.
Of course not. And coming to Ukraine, if Donald Trump goes ahead, and the big hope, at least for me, is that he goes ahead and does what he said, i.e., to stop providing military aid and intelligence, which is far more important. How do you see the dynamic shifting? Because the Europeans are still belligerent, UK, France, Germany still belligerent. Will they be able to continue this operation without American input? And what could be the consequences? Because if Europe continues the fight and the US stays off, I mean, at some point, Russia might decide to hit out into UK, or is that something that could happen? What do
There
you
are a
see
lot of
happening?
there are a lot of Russians who are quite hot about these things and who would like to use their Poseidon drone submarine. Five,
I hope
as
not.
they say, 5 Poseidon strikes against the United Kingdom would sink the whole island.
Essentially, I mean,
This is what popular feeling. Of course, a lot of people are very angry at the leadership or the anti-Russian movement given by London, by successive British governments, whether they call themselves conservatives or Labour. That is a real issue.
mhm,
Um, but overall, the the Russians want a peace. They want recognition And the main point I wanted to make is that Mr. Trump is 80 years old, but the speed of his action today is of a 20-year-old.
Absolutely.
The Europeans may be 55, but they're acting like 85. He is
It's true.
running circles around Europeans.
It's incredible.
They are left speechless, and in this condition, he can win. Just by their very nature, they are slow-acting beasts. And,
It's true.
and Trump is simply leaving them in the dust.
That's true. So, so Europe will continue the fight, you think, or somehow Trump will get them to stand down? Because that's the important part. I mean, Trump could leave Ukraine alone, but if these, nincompoops continue the fight, we're not going anywhere.
Trump wants to have a political sweep in Europe.
Mhm.
This is an ideological issue. Europe,
Correct.
the EU institutions are exactly the same people whom he is busy attacking in the United States. They're all people who tried to intervene in the American elections in
True.
2016, in 2020, to keep him out of power. And he's perfectly aware of that. So he is intent on causing as much difficulty for them as possible and to remove these people from power. And he may succeed. If he reaches an agreement with Putin, the European leaders who have been most belligerent are going to be caught out.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them can eat their words and try to adjust to the new reality, but others of them are so heavily invested in this belligerence that they will have to resign.
They will. I really look forward to these resignations because some of them are horrible, have horrible approval ratings at home. I mean, France could be much better off without a Macron and Merz, maybe it's time. I was speaking to Patrick Babb, one of the journalists, a couple of days ago, and he was saying the same thing. We need a new democratic elite in Europe. I mean, and that could be a 30-year process, he said. So that was a very insightful thought from him. Quick, one more question. Um, do you see this ending within the next few weeks, or could this negotiation continue for a few more months? Is that something that could go on?
Well, if it goes on for a few more months, then they won't have to discuss the question of giving up unconquered parts of Donbass, because the whole
I mean,
Donbass will be in Russian hands. So I think it'll be resolved before that.
okay,
The issue before us is when and under which conditions will Mr. Zelensky and all the people around him and the former presidents of Ukraine be swept aside. Because within the Rada, there are the former presidents who are as vicious as Mr. Zelensky. The only difference is that he's sitting on a throne and they're not. I
right.
think that there is a reasonable chance that there will be an interim president set up after Mr. Zelensky is forced to resign over corruption, which may take place in a week or two. After all, they've got Yermak on the run. I say on the run
Right.
because he's gone to the front. The hell he's gone to the front. He's gone as far to the rear as he can, and he's looking for his escape. And
Probably Dubai.
when they really go through his papers, I think they'll be nailing Zelensky. So I don't believe he'll be in power for very long. The question is who will succeed him. Judging by the 28-point plan, which had as one of its points Ukrainian elections within
Right.
90 days or whatever, 30 days, I think it was. It won't, 30 days is unrealistic, but say within 90 days they could do that. And then there will be a government installed that can negotiate the capitulation with the Russians. I don't think any interim president would dare do that.
No, of course.
He wouldn't have the authority
For the mandate.
for the mandate. So let's assume that the paperwork can take 90 days to be realistic in good conditions. But the eventual outcome will be clear in the assignment of the interim president. There are some people say it would be Zelensky. I doubt it, because he is being handled by the
Brits.
Brits, who don't want a settlement.
No.
It could be Arestovich, who is being handled by the Americans, who do.
Depends whose man gets in.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow. It's really an amazing time in politics, and if this negotiated settlement doesn't come to place, imagine that the Russians are still belligerent. They say no, we want all of it, Zaporizhia, unconquered territories as well, and they refuse to budge. And the war, let's say, continues. How long do you think before Ukraine's front lines really crumble? Because the last few weeks, every day they take more and more incrementally. And going by all records, especially from Mediazona, they seem to be losing lives or having stable casualties. Do you think they could get all the way to the Dnieper and take Odessa? Is that something? Because some people, I spoke to Larry C. Johnson, a CIA analyst, wonderful conversation. He said they might have to go all the way to Odessa. Is that something that could happen in eventuality in case we are not able to get this settled?
Well,
Going that far.
they don't have to go very far to reach Odessa. Just look at the map. Look at the map. They don't, in the Kherson Oblast, which is one of the four oblasts
Correct.
that are constitutionally integrated into the Russian Federation. The Russians don't hold Kherson itself, the city, because it's on the other side of the Dnieper River.
Right.
That is, it's on the right bank of the west bank of the Dnieper. But they hold they hold most of Kherson Oblast. And if you look at the map, from Kherson Oblast to Odessa, that's a long walk. This is or a short boat ride. So it is feasible for them to take it, and I think they will. If there is if there is a peace settlement, then Odessa will stay in Ukraine's hands. If there is no peace settlement, if it is just a de facto end of fighting, then Odessa clearly will be taken by the Russians, because it is viewed by the Brits and by the French as an essential staging ground for attacks on Crimea and on the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So it is obligatory if the Russians hold it, if the rump Ukraine is going to remain belligerent. That's how I see it. But as you spoke of the other oblasts, yes, the Russians will take them. I think it's very important that they take Kharkiv, which you didn't mention, because that is the easternmost province or oblast of Ukraine. It is from that oblast, just maybe it's 30, 50, 100 kilometers away, you've got the Russian border. And that has been the staging ground for these incursions into Belgorod, and most importantly into Kursk province of the Russian Federation.
Right.
Besides that, as the second largest city in Ukraine, it is a Russian-speaking city. So I could see them taking Kharkiv. And what the Ukrainians will have is maybe 60% of the overall territory of the former Ukraine, all to the west of the Dnieper River. The Russians will not take that area to the west because they don't need it. If they would have the economically most valuable part of Ukraine, that is the whole industrial part of Ukraine, isn't the Donbass, always was.
Right.
And also a large part of the Black Earth. You'll have a very limited economy of Ukraine, and the Russians can ensure de facto that nothing threatening them is delivered or stays in Ukraine from Western arms. So it is not an ideal situation. The Russians clearly would prefer international recognition of the new boundaries and reintegration into the European and collective West. Well, integration,
Mm.
good relations, good commercial relations, anyway, which is feasible only if there's a peace treaty.
Mm. It's actually quite incredible because this last several years, 4.5, 5 years, actually since 2007, the Russians have been very consistent, at least diplomatically, on their messaging, and I think they will continue to be consistent. And which is why I find it quite difficult for them to accept concessions in this 28-point plan. But indeed, Odessa will become a thorn if they won't take it at some point, and if the West continues to remain belligerent. And I think that would be a tragedy because how do you think on the whole, who is fighting better between the two? We've seen a lot of innovation come out from Ukrainian side, be it drones, interceptor drones, small drones to attack air defense systems. But you've also seen that on the Russian side. Who do you think is adapting better in this combat? Although Ukraine is facing a tough time, um, can they
Well,
still hold out somehow?
you're very right in directing attention to the drone warfare. The
Right,
war started out as a artillery war. That is, the war of attrition was, by Russian definition, was an artillery war, where the Russians had a 10-to-1 advantage in the artillery uh, hardware and in munitions. That was the way it started. Now, a
correct.
10-to-1 advantage in this hardware gives you virtually a 10-to-1 advantage in the kill ratio. So the Ukrainians were at a big disadvantage for at least 2.5 years of this conflict. The last year has seen increasing importance of drone warfare. And drone warfare, as I see it, is the big leveler. You don't need 400,000 troops to do very effective drone warfare, which prevents the enemy from concentrating more than a handful of soldiers in any one place at any one time.
Right,
Just as we never, because of the handheld anti-tank weapons which the United States supplied, there never was a tank war, a tank battle in three
right.
and a half years. Tanks have become mobile artillery, and that's it. The Russians,
Yes.
they dig in their tanks and they fire 10, 15, 20 kilometers tank, and that's it. There is no they are not accompanying infantry in mass assaults.
Right.
That's the logic of there, and that logic is not being used. So the war from the very beginning was awkward as a tank war. It was artillery gun war, and I say the Russians have the advantage. They don't have that kind of advantage, a 10-to-1 over in drones. Maybe if you look at the daily figures on how many drones the Russians have sent to Ukraine and how
Right.
many drones the Ukrainians have sent to Russia, maybe it's a 5-to-1 advantage and the
Right.
Russians
It's a
have a
bit
number.
less. Yeah,
It's
I
not
agree.
10. Moreover, well, besides the Russians, if you people say, "Oh, why do you watch Russian television?" Well, I'm surprised to hear that from former CIA people. You can learn a lot if you keep your eyes glued. You can learn,
Correct.
for example, that most of the Ukrainian soldiers that are POWs are in their late 50s and 60s. They're not 20-year-olds.
Correct.
There are people who tell you, "Oh, they're killing all the young people." They're not looking at facts. They don't care about facts. You can also see that the very conscientious war journalism that the Russians put on television, interviewing people on the front lines, that they're all looking for birdies all the time. So to think that this is, oh, it's just a walk in the rose garden, it isn't. It is a very, very tough war, even if you're on the winning side. And people are afraid for their lives every time they go out in the field, whether it's on a motorcycle or in one of these, or a jeep or whatever. So the Russians are facing very tough conditions, even if they're winning massively from the way the front lines are moving.
And do you think, let's hope that they're able to settle this war. Do you see a lot of Ukrainians actually returning back to Ukraine if there's a peaceful settlement? Because almost 6-7 million of them maybe are in the European Union. Do you see that happening as well, or?
There are quite a few of them right around here in Brussels.
I know.
And I'm not joking. You get in public transport, and I hear perfect Russian spoken. And I know there aren't too many. There are not too many Russians here. There are only
No.
Russian speaking Ukrainians. So
Correct.
will they go back? I don't know. I don't. Looking at people, families with young kids who have adapted and fit in, I don't see any reason for them to go back.
Right.
But there are a lot of young people. Probably there will be big opportunities if Mr. Trump has his way. And he gets
It's true. He'll have his
50
casino going very quick.
$50 billion to throw at developing Ukraine. It could become attractive for young Ukrainians to go back and take jobs with these new developing opportunities.
Oh. And when was last time you went to Russia now? How long has it been?
Oh, 5 weeks ago.
5 weeks ago. Wow.
Yes.
How was your latest trip?
Well, I understood that the war has come to the home front in Russia. But partly it's because of drones. You know, Mr. Zelensky was bleating, "Oh, I need these long-range missiles." The hell he does. They're doing a pretty good job of bringing the war home to Russians with drones. Drones that go 1,200 kilometers or more. And we had in St. Petersburg, there were drone warnings, which obviously shut down the airport for a little while because my Turkish Airlines plane arrived late. And I live in an outlying borough of Petersburg called Pushkin. It's about 20 kilometers from the center of the city. We have a helicopter base near us. This area has cadets. It always had soldier cadet schools, which now have also foreign students, foreign officers who come for training in Russia from Africa, from Asia. And we have a military hospital. We have that helicopter base is bringing in seriously wounded Russian soldiers from the front, not directly from the front, but from a distribution point in Russia, where these soldiers are sent by helicopter to various specialized. You would have a lot of amputees, a lot of grievously wounded people from shrapnel, but also now particularly from these drone attacks. So the home front now is aware that there's a war going on, whereas
Okay.
on earlier visits going back a year or more, you didn't. Otherwise, the consumerism is fine. Stores are fully stocked. There's always a rotation of suppliers. So it's each time I come, there's somewhat different supplies coming in for computers or for various foodstuffs. But the stock, but it's all of high quality. Prices are fairly stable. I'd say 10% overall inflation. Nothing dramatic. And still prices, because of the very cheap ruble, the prices in the supermarket are probably 30-40% below Belgian prices.
Okay.
So of course, salaries are much lower as well. But in general, you don't in your pocketbook, you don't feel the war. But when you go out in the street and you have no mobile internet, and your taxi can't find you, that is the taxis which are using an Uber-like software, as geolocation, and they come to you and they can't locate you because the GPS doesn't work, because
It's been jammed.
It's been turned off to prevent its use by drones. Then you know that daily life is affected by the war, 1,000, 1,500 kilometers away from the front.
Now, a key question comes to my mind. We've seen during especially the last couple of years, you see a lot of drone attacks. You see both sides attacking. Often you see the Ukrainians going for the soldiers. You will see an attempt by the Russian drone operators to hit the vehicle instead. I've seen a lot of that. They don't seem to go after it seems to me, and correct me if you say maybe that's wrong. It seems to me Russians seem to be fighting in more of a humane war. They seem to be a bit more. I mean, take Pokrovsk or Hulapole. They're dropping leaflets. They're allowing people to surrender. Uh, do you think that causes them some disadvantage on the battlefield, or because yeah, there's a lot of brutality that is shown to them on the battlefield by the Ukrainians, I find.
Well, I've just issued an essay today, which turns this whole thing on its head. I don't believe the war has been fought in a humane way, not by intent, but by consequence. There was no
Correct.
need for this war to go beyond a week. If the
Correct.
Russians had prepared properly and had taken Kiev, it would have been over in the first month. But they didn't prepare properly. The calculations were badly advised. The government, the Kremlin was not using its own military intelligence officers properly. And they had a misjudgment of how the invasion would be taken by the Ukrainian military. You know that in 2014, Crimea surrendered almost without a shot being fired. The
Correct.
forces were equal. 20,000 Russian troops in Crimea who were there under terms of the lease agreement for the naval base, and 20,000
Correct.
Ukrainians. Not a shot was fired. The white flag was raised. The Russians mistakenly assumed something similar would happen in 22. Well, it sure as hell didn't. And
Mm.
how they could miss that is a real serious breach. I can tell you how they missed it because I listened to my taxi driver. Huh? And people say, "Oh, what can a taxi driver tell you?" Well, a
A lot.
Russian taxi drivers are not Uber people, huh? The taxi driver who spoke to me 3 months into the war was a recently retired military intelligence officer who maintained close contact with his former buddies and who told him, they didn't consult us at all when they prepared and waged this invasion of Ukraine.
Mm.
Now, that may sound strange, but it's not any different from Mr. Putin not consulting Mr. Lavrov today.
Mm.
This is quite exceptional, and I think it's a very big mistake. My point is that if the invasion had been properly prepared, they would have had not 150,000 troops, but 450,000 troops. Humane. The Soviet Union was very cruel. It was not humane, right? But how
Mm.
many people died and how long did it take for Russia to achieve regime change in 1956 in Budapest and in 1968 in Prague? A few days, a few weeks. How many people were
Correct.
killed? Very few. Not 1.7 million in this humane operation in Ukraine. So excuse me, this has not turned out to be humane.
Mm. It's a tragic war indeed. Both sides are going at it quite harshly. Um, do you see what are what does the future look like for all of us in Europe if this war doesn't end? I mean, this might be the last question for you for this evening.
Well, the future does not look very good for us if the war doesn't end, but it will end. And I think, I don't know whether he's going to get the Peace Prize. There are too many people who hate him to give Mr. Trump any kind of
I
Peace
wouldn't
Prize.
count on it. I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah. So, but that is really not the point. I think
No.
he is having a very big role in bringing this to an end, and I think he will succeed. I think Mr. Putin will make reasonable compromises.
Correct.
He is not a maximalist. He also wants the war to end, and he wants it to end in a piece of paper that brings Russia back into normal relations with Europe in particular. So
Hmm.
it will end. I'm not a pessimist at all. How
Okay,
long will it
great.
take? It's very hard to say. There are the big issue is how soon will the Ukrainian government fall, and people who are more interested in the Ukrainian nation than in ideology and ethnic superiority take power in Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have been the biggest victims of this and of their own government.
It's absolutely true, and it's tragic that for those who don't know, everybody who's 22 till the age of 60 plus is already mobilized in Ukraine, and yeah, they face heavy casualties, hundreds of FABs every day. It's not a walk in the park. Uh, Dr. Gilbert, you have been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for this wonderful insight. I hope the audience loves it. I hope we can have you back on this channel in the next few weeks or months. I will try to come back to your schedule, but it was really a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time. I wish you a lovely evening. And since we're in Brussels, we should go out for a drink one of these days. I will get to you and let's go have a drink, and then maybe we can do a walk down Brussels and do a walking podcast, see if that's possible.
Okay.
With
Well,
some Belgian fries, yeah.
it was fun. So I thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.